politics in the Peach State. Polls are closed in Georgia, where Democrats see an opening to flip the congressional seat left open by Tom Price, President Trump's Secretary of Health and Human Services. Democrat Jon Ossoff, a 30-year-old former congressional staffer, is one of the frontrunners in the traditionally Republican district, in part because GOP support is split among 11 candidates. Here's how the Washington Post describes the race. This suburban swath north of Atlanta resembles the cracked mirror of the GOP's national identity crisis, with 11 candidates bitterly feuding over what it means to be a Republican in the age of President Trump. President Trump hasn't backed any one Republican, but has used his Twitter account to target Ossoff, the leading Democrat, this morning calling him very weak and very bad, and urging Republicans to force a runoff election, which he says would be an easy win. We'll have more on the Georgia race in a moment, but while President Trump was acting as a surrogate for all 11 Republicans in that race, he made a return trip to Wisconsin on Tuesday. He was the first Republican to carry the state since Ronald Reagan, and this visit came with just over a week until the president marks 100 days in office. His message to the blue-collar community of Kenosha: "I'm keeping my promises." He visited a tool manufacturing company and signed an executive order designed to make it harder for companies to replace American workers with cheaper foreign labor. He also told supporters that the order was a key part of his America First platform.
The policy of our government is to aggressively promote and use American-made goods and to ensure that American labor is hired to do the job. It's America first. You better believe it. It's time. It's time, right? It's time.
The executive order instructs government agencies to review and strengthen existing policies that encourage firms to hire American labor. When a senior administration official was asked about following it up with legislation, the official said the executive order was the most muscular action the White House could take. The trip to Wisconsin was one of just a handful the president has taken since inauguration. Our Mark Knoller counts 5 out-of-town trips for speeches from President Trump, compared to 9 from President Obama and 18 from President Bush at this point in their first terms. Mr. Trump also hasn't taken any trips abroad. Vice President Mike Pence, however, is on a 10-day trip to the Asia-Pacific region, where earlier this week he visited the doorstep of North Korea and warned the regime of U.S. action if it didn't terminate its nuclear program. The Trump administration has ramped up its rhetoric toward North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in recent days. And on Tuesday, the president said Americans should be concerned about the prospect of a nuclear war.
You don't know exactly who you're dealing with. I had a great meeting with the president of China, and that meeting tells me a lot, and you've seen a lot of things happen. They have a pretty good power, not a great power perhaps, but a pretty good power over North Korea. We're going to see what happens. It's a very tricky situation. This should have been done by President Obama. It should have been done by previous presidents all the way back to Clinton. And everybody pushed it off. They just pushed it off. And, you know, if you look at Clinton, you read his book, he talked about how he made this wonderful deal. He didn't make a good deal. He made a terrible deal. All he did is say, essentially, do whatever you want to do. And now I'm put in a position where he actually has nuclear, and we're going to have to do something about it.
Let's bring in Cameron Joseph and Sean Sullivan in D.C. Cameron is Washington bureau chief for the New York Daily News, and Sean is a congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Gentlemen, welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Sean, let me start with you. We heard President Trump putting blame for the North Korean challenge on his predecessors. In terms of substance, Sean, how different, in fact, is this White House's approach from past administrations?
Well, I think that's going to be what we find out in the coming weeks. I think this president is still trying to get to know the situation and how he wants to approach this. And what we heard from him in leveling blame against past presidents is very much in line with what we've seen from President Trump and then candidate Trump on the campaign trail, you know, in difficult situations, blaming other leaders for problems that he is confronting. And so It remains to be seen. I mean, how aggressive is this administration going to be towards North Korea? How open are they going to be to working with China to try to resolve tensions, which is what a lot of lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill are asking for? That's what we're going to see in the coming months. Right now, it's really too early to tell what this administration's approach, policy-wise, is going to be to North Korea.
Cameron, what do you think? Is it too soon to tell?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think a lot of this is going to depend on what China decides to do. Obviously, they have North Korea basically as a client state for the last 60 years. At the same time, they don't want direct confrontation. They definitely don't want war in the region, and so I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays. And it's really unclear, while President Trump is criticizing his predecessors, what exactly he's going to do differently. They said they were sending a carrier towards the Korean Peninsula. It turns out that it actually wasn't anywhere near there, we found out today. And so it really remains to be seen what policy changes and, frankly, what policy President Trump has past some saber rattling right now. And so we're just going to have to wait and hopefully that things don't go sideways there.
Yeah, a lot of open questions right now. Well, critics have charged that the White House attention on these recent challenges overseas has undermined the president's America First promise. Sean, do you think that his base cares about that?
I think that, in the coming months, if we start to see more of a focus on, situation abroad and foreign policy and not as much focus on domestic things, then yeah, I think that could become an issue. You heard him earlier in that soundbite saying America first, America first. That is what we heard from Trump as a candidate time and again. And when you look at the legislation on Capitol Hill, in the last few weeks, we've not really seen anything that spearheads any sort of infrastructure program or jobs program. Domestically, of course, we had a big debate over healthcare that went nowhere. So I think, yeah, there are going to be a lot of voters in Trump's base who are saying, look, we voted for this candidate for president because he thought, because we thought he would prioritize our needs. And right now he's dealing with a foreign policy situation that is very turbulent abroad. So I think that's why we saw him go to Wisconsin today, make the speech that he did, issue the executive order that he did to sort of signal to his supporters and his base, hey, I haven't forgotten about my campaign promises to you guys. Now, whether an executive order is enough to satisfy a lot of his supporters, that remains to be seen. I think a lot of them would want to see stronger legislation, perhaps. But I think it's clear that the White House understands that they can't just look past some of the promises that the president made as a candidate about, essentially his America First platform.
Yeah, Cameron, what do you think the president was hoping to accomplish on his visit to Kenosha, Wisconsin on Tuesday, which, as you noted in your piece, is a working class community?
Yeah, I think it was a state and a region of the state that he won very narrowly, and it's an area that he's going to need to do very well again in 3+ years if he's going to become president for a second term. And the real question is whether he can get anything done substantively in the long term. This executive order really has no teeth. It really isn't going to do much in the long term. It's a good one-day story for him, but the question is whether he can really get anything done legislatively. And so far, he hasn't come up with anything so far in terms of real law changes. The only thing that's come out of Congress that has helped him really in the long run is the Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, which was a reason that a lot of people voted for him, especially some conservatives didn't love him. But he's going to have to get something, put points on the board. And he keeps talking about these 100 days. The first 100 days was something that internally was something really important to them. We're closing in on that. We don't really see any laws. So it's tough.
Yeah, and to follow up on your point, Cameron, I mean, I thought it was interesting. The comment from the White House was that an executive order was the quote unquote most muscular thing the administration could do. What did you think about that, Cameron? It's like tacit acknowledgement,
I mean,
essentially.
It is. Yeah, they can't do that much without Congress. Congress is the one that makes the laws. Now, some of this is President Trump having a very different idea of what being a Republican means than some of the Republicans in Congress. At the same time, he hasn't been able to get anything done, and President Obama got a lot done in the first 100 days. Granted, there was a major economic crisis that spurred the stimulus forward, but it's really a struggle for him right now, and part of that is President Trump and the fact that he hasn't really gotten a lot of his people in place yet and on board yet, and they're warring internally about exactly what they should be pursuing. Part of it is that he keeps changing his mind about what he wants to do. He said he's going to move on from healthcare reform and move on to taxes. Now he's saying the reverse. Obviously, foreign policy tends to intrude on any president. We saw that with President George W. Bush, who basically ran as a domestic candidate, promising not to get involved in foreign entanglements, and then you saw what happened with 9/11, and that changed his whole presidency and really defined it. So some of this is just, it's very hard to be president, it's very hard to get things done. Some of these are self-inflicted wounds.
Sean, let me ask you, there's a movement from Democrats not to support any tax reform measure unless President Trump releases his tax returns. What do you make of that as a strategy?
Well, I think it shows the Democrats think that, the fact that the president has not released his taxes is something that they think angers a lot of Americans, and something that they think that they can use in any debate about taxes or tax reform to, blunt any momentum Republicans have from the very beginning. I mean, when you look at the larger context of this, it is pretty unprecedented what this president has done and what he did as a candidate in terms of not releasing his taxes. And so they're going to use every opportunity in a debate about taxes to bring that up. And so it's not going away. We're seeing this. We're seeing Democratic lawmakers on the Hill say that this should be part of, any, perhaps even, any debate or investigation into, Trump's and his aides' potential ties to Russia. We're hearing it obviously in the context of the tax reform debate. So this is going to continue to be an issue until the president decides to release his tax returns, and so far he hasn't done that.
Well, Cameron, you asked Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer about this on Tuesday. What did he say?
He basically said it's going to be much harder to get any tax reform done. And I think he has a valid point. Tax reform is not easy to get done. It's about as easy as healthcare, and we saw how well that went. There's a reason we haven't seen comprehensive tax reform since the 1980s. It's not simple. There's a lot of different counter pressures, and it's hard to get everybody on board, even when everyone's acting in good faith. And right now, it's a very toxic partisan environment in D.C. On top of that, Republicans can't agree on exactly what they'd want, even in a perfect world, and President Trump has some different ideas than some of the congressional Republicans. But this tax issue, his own taxes, is huge because he could be making a ton of money off of some of these changes, especially with real estate business. The bottom line is very directly affected by tax rates and how things you can carry forward debts, which we saw in one of the few years we have seen it with Trump in the 95 returns. It looks like he wrote off a huge amount of debt that he probably meant he didn't have to pay taxes for a couple of years after that. So the real question is, it's a very complicated issue. Sometimes people glaze over when they're hearing about this. Tax reform is not something that all but the nerdiest really get into. But American people can understand the president's going to make money off of any changes, and that really could be one of the daggers for this very complicated effort that I don't think is going to be moving very easily.
Yeah, and tax is certainly a top of mind at this time of year. Sean Sullivan and Cameron Joseph in Washington, appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Thank you.